Here we go. God, we've tried doing this already once or twice, and nothing but devilish functions to screw with us, which tells me that this is definitely important that I get it out. It's almost discouraged me to try because it seems like it's going to be so difficult. I promised that I would read the opening of the eyes. And so, again, I think if you go to 2016, in May, like a 1605 something, you'll find the beginning of the lecture from President Ikeda on the opening of the eyes, and that goes all the way into 2017, like February. So it took us just like 10 months to get through that whole lecture. That will be available to you now so that you can go back and forth between listening to the audio or listening to this video to understand what the content of the opening of the eyes is. As President Ikeda gives that lecture, it'll bring more to it, to you, I believe. The opening of the eyes is a very deep and technical, it's difficult to read Gosho, because in it, basically, the Daishonin qualifies why he's the Daishonin. And with that, he has to give all kinds of substantive kind of backup to why his claim isn't crazy and he's not nuts for making it. And in fact, actually, all he's doing is fulfilling the prophecies that have been made in the prior sutras. And that, in fact, without his advent, without him doing what he's doing, all of the sutras would be false and phony because nothing that they said would have actually all occurred. He's the reason that it's all actualizing itself in the latter day of the law, in the 500-year period and beyond, as he's already been qualified. So I'm going to be doing that. This is going to be hours long. This is going to take. We're going to have people coming in and out of the house that are going to break my concentration, and I'm going to have to just stop abruptly a couple of times in order to get through this to accommodate the reality of my life with the fact that there are 12 people living in this house. They keep coming around and interrupting us, and it blows my cool, and I'm going to try and keep my cool today, so hang with me. This is a man named Mr. Koshikawa that I need to bring to everyone's attention. You know, I talked about mentors. This is my very best good friend. I owe him everything because he's actually the contemporary SGI leader, Japanese again, by the way, as you can tell by Koshikawa, who basically said, wow, Tom, you have a better understanding of the Gosho than anybody I know of where we live. And so he was very, very, not just instrumental, he really pushed me to not be afraid to express the Buddhism that I had been taught, because he said, that's the correct understanding, Tom. You're very capable to present it. So that's what started our group. That's what started our group study sessions. Everything started with Mr. Koshikawa. Mr. Koshikawa now is at a time in life, as I will be at some point in time, where he's just physically not capable of getting around and doing the things that he loves most, which is encouraging people to chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. So Mr. Koshikawa, I hope Mrs. Koshikawa gets this video in front of you and you understand that I am dedicating this most important reading to you, Sensei. So thank you so much for everything, and let's read The Opening of the Eyes by Nichiren. It starts on page 220. It's 70 pages long, essentially. I'm going to go ahead and start with the background that's all the way on 288. So bear with me, everyone. Okay, we're going to start with the background. This treatise is one of Nichiren Daishonin's 5 most important writings, in which he reveals his identity as the Buddha of the latter day of the law, who possesses the 3 virtues of sovereign, teacher, and parent. In the 2nd month of the 9th year of Brinne, 1272, was still in exile under harsh conditions on Sado Island, the Daishonin completed this work in 2 volumes and addressed it to Shijo Kingo, one of his leading disciples in Kamakura, and a samurai who was in the employ of the ruling Hojo clan on behalf of all of his followers. When the Daishonin, so again, this is a major treatise that was sent to the lay people that were supporting him through Shijo Kingo. When the Daishonin was taken to Tatsunokuchi in Kamakura in 1271, Shijo Kingo accompanied him, having resolved to die by his side, and personally witnessed his triumph over execution. Also, he had journeyed to Sado to visit the Daishonin in exile and sent his messengers to him with writing materials and other necessities. So it wasn't just personal visits. He was always keeping supplies and food and necessities going to support and keep the Daishonin sustained as far as life is concerned. The object of devotion for observing the mind, which followed this Gosho by a year or so, written in 1273, clarifies from the viewpoint of the law the object of devotion that enables all people to attain Buddhahood, the Gohonzon. The opening of the eyes treats the same subject in terms of the person. That is, it shows Nichiren Daishonin to be the Buddha who would establish the object of devotion for all humankind to achieve Buddhahood. The object of devotion is the embodiment of the Daishonin's enlightenment to Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Okay, so the Gohonzon is the embodiment of the Daishonin's enlightenment to Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, the law implied in the depths of Lotus Sutra. Nichiren Daishonin's life on the forbidding island of Sado was full of hardship. His hut was open to wind and snow, and he lacked food, clothing, and writing materials. In addition to his physical suffering, he was greatly troubled by the news that many of his followers in Kamakura had abandoned their faith. Feeling himself constantly facing the shadow of death, the Daishonin wrote this treatise to encourage his disciples as though it were his last will and testament. Nichiren Daishonin later described his motives behind the work in his Actions of the Votary of the Lotus Sutra, which is on the we've already read. It's one of the videos that's in the compilation of our many years of reading them. After everyone had gone, he says, from the Votaries of the Lotus Sutra, this is, by the way, I'm still reading from 288, second column, first full paragraph. Nichiren Daishonin later described his motives behind the work in his Actions of the Votary of the Lotus Sutra. After everyone, quote, after everyone had gone, I began to put into shape a work in 2 volumes called The Opening of the Eyes, which I had been working on since the 11th month of the previous year. I wanted to record the wonder of Nichiren in case I should be beheaded. The essential message of this work is that the destiny of Japan depends solely upon Nichiren. A house without a pillar collapses and a person without a soul is dead. Nichiren is the soul of the people of this country. The title, that was quote unquote, pardon me. In the title, The Opening of the Eyes, the title, The Opening of the Eyes, means to enable people to see the truth. In other words, to free people from illusion and distorted views and awaken them to an understanding of the correct teaching and its correct teacher. Not just the correct teaching, not just to open their eyes to the law, but to open their eyes to the teacher as well, because they're inseparable. Okay, please understand that's the part that a lot of people miss. This isn't just talking about Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. This is really talking about the Gohonzon and the life of Nichiren. The title, The Opening of the Eyes, means to enable people to see the truth. In other words, to free people from illusions and distorted views and awaken them to an understanding of the correct teaching and its correct teacher. The work describes the role the Daishonin played in championing the supremacy of the Lotus Sutra and in spreading its teachings, as he himself viewed and experienced it. A passage from this treatise reads, on the 12th day of the 9th month of last year, between the hours of the rat and the ox, 11 p.m. to 3 a.m., this person named Nichiren was beheaded. It is his soul that has come to this island of Sado. It was through the Tatsunokuchi persecution that Nichiren Daishonin revealed his true identity as the eternal Buddha, the original teacher. This passage refers to the death of a common person named Nichiren and indicates from then on, the Daishonin was to reveal in full his enlightenment as the Buddha of the latter day of the law. Nichiren Daishonin begins this treatise with the words, there are 3 categories of people that all human beings should respect. They are the sovereign, the teacher, and the parent, from page 220. The 3 virtues of sovereign, teacher, and parent are equated with the qualifications of a Buddha. The virtue of sovereign is the power to protect all living beings. The virtue of teacher is the wisdom to lead all to enlightenment. And the virtue of parent means compassion to nurture and support them. These three virtues constitute a theme that runs throughout this treatise, and at the conclusion of this work, the Daishonin declares, I, Nichiren, am the sovereign, teacher, and father and mother to all the people of Japan, from page 287. At the outset of Nichiren Daishonin discusses Confucianism, Taoism, and Brahmanism, Hinayana and provisional Mahayana Buddhism, and then moves on to the Lotus Sutra. He attributes the disasters ravaging Japan to the confusion in Buddhism and the failure by both rulers and subjects to recognize the supremacy of the Lotus Sutra. Here he cites two reasons why the sutra is supreme. One is that the theoretical teaching, the first half of the sutra, reveals that people of the two vehicles can attain enlightenment, a possibility utterly denied in the previous 42 years of the Buddha's preaching. This substantiates the mutual possession of the 10 worlds and the statement that Buddhahood is open to all. The other reason is that in the essential teaching, the latter half of the sutra, Shakyamuni Buddha proclaims that he first attained enlightenment in an unfathomably remote past. The Daishonin states that Shakyamuni Buddha himself declared that the Lotus Sutra is the most difficult to believe and difficult to understand. In this sutra, the Buddha implied the supreme teaching, because the supreme teaching is hidden in the depths of the 16th chapter. In this sutra, the Buddha implied the supreme teaching, as stated, the doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life is found in only one place, hidden in the depths of the lifespan chapter of the essential teaching of the Lotus Sutra. And he's referring to actual Ichinen Sanzen, not the theoretical Ichinen Sanzen that would follow prior to the latter day of the law. The Daishonin takes the position that the only revelation of the truth of Buddhism can save the nation and the people. This conviction, he says, has moved him to propagate the essence of the Lotus Sutra in spite of the persecution that he knew he would incur, just as it occurs with us. He realized that his followers might doubt him because of the apparent failure of the gods to protect a votary of the Lotus Sutra. So he prepares us all for what we will follow in terms of our experience because we are of the same mind as him. Therefore, he stated that this doubt about, am I really doing the right thing or not? Do I really understand the correct teaching? This doubt, because I'm being protected. That's the whole predication. He's saying, don't look at whether or not I'm encountering difficulties as the validation of what I'm saying. The fact that I encountered difficulties is actually the validation of what I'm saying. This doubt lies at the heart of this piece I am writing, and because it is the most important concern of my entire life, I will raise it again and again here and emphasize it more and more before I attempt to answer it, he says from page 243. The second part of this treatise discusses the emergence from the earth in the lifespan chapters of the Lotus Sutra, where Shakyamuni Buddha summons forth countless bodhisattvas from beneath the earth and reveals that he actually attained enlightenment in the remote past, and that all the Buddhas of the other sutras are his emanations, and all the bodhisattvas his disciples. Nichiren Daishonin clarifies that the Buddha of the lifespan chapter is the teacher of all Buddhas. That's the original teacher. At this point, an implicit analogy begins to emerge. The doubt held by Shakyamuni's disciples about how he could possibly have taught the countless bodhisattvas of the earth in this life leads to the revelation of his true identity as the Buddha who attained enlightenment countless kalpas ago, numberless major world system kalpas ago. Similarly, the doubt held by the Daishonin's followers about why he has been exiled and suffered so many persecutions leads to an understanding of his true identity as the Buddha of the latter day. Then the Daishonin mentions the principle of sowing, maturing, and harvesting. He points to the unsurpassed law whereby all Buddhas attain enlightenment, Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. This law is what lies in the depths of the lifespan chapter. Nichiren Daishonin directly teaches this law, the true cause for attaining Buddhahood. And his Buddhism is called the Buddhism of sowing because it implants this seed of enlightenment in the lives of those who practice it. In this light, He possesses the virtues of sovereign, teacher, and parent for humanity as a whole. Nichiren Daishonin explains that each sutra has its own claim to excellence. He also gives examples of statements in which various sutras assert their own supremacy to the other teachings. But the Lotus Sutra alone declares that it is supreme among all sutras, and the Daishonin reconfirms its supremacy. The Lotus Sutra speaks of the three powerful enemies of the sutra and prophesies opposition and hostility toward the sutra and its votary, or its votaries. All this the Daishonin had himself encountered. All this is predicted in the sutra. As the votary of the Lotus Sutra, he vows to stake his life on the cause of saving all people, saying, "Let the gods forsake me, let all persecutions assail me, still I will give my life for the sake of the law. I will be the pillar of Japan. I will be the eyes of Japan. I will be the great ship of Japan. This is my vow, and I will never forsake it." From page 280 and 281, almost at the end of the Gosho. He then assures his disciples that they will definitely attain Buddhahood as long as they do not as long as they do not permit themselves to be overcome by doubts, even when difficulties befall them. Even when difficulties befall them. In the final section of this treatise, Nichiren Daishonin explains that there are two ways to propagate the Lotus Sutra: shoju, or gentle persuasion, and shakabuku, or strict refutation. Here the Daishonin argues that both methods should be used because there are two kinds of countries: those whose peoples are ignorant of the correct teaching of Buddhism, and those whose people deliberately oppose it. But Japan, as a nation that slanders the correct teaching, requires the shakabuku method. And where I live, it's the same way. Where you live, it may not be. Then he concludes that to remove suffering and give joy to the people is the Buddhist teaching. The Daishonin has devoted himself to refuting and rooting out the causes of human misery. For him, the exile to Sado was only a small suffering in this life. Indeed, he feels great joy because of the results he is confident will come in the future. And so, again, this all ends talking about shoju versus shakabuku. And he says, basically, the shit hit the fan on me because I did shakabuku from day one, because that's what's called for what I have to do here amidst all of these misunderstandings of Buddhism and the different sects of Buddhism, the different schools of Buddhism. You go to Europe or you go to the United States, no one would have any of that difficulty because they would not be pre-programmed to have those misunderstandings. Okay, so that's why some of this may seem a little dry, because those of you that are not coming from a background of Buddhism are going to go like, well, what's this got to do with me? It has everything to do with all of us, because we're all an extension of Nichiren. Just like Koshika was an extension of Nichiren, I am an extension of Nichiren. We all are extensions of Nichiren. That's what makes us bodhisattvas of the earth. Okay, we're of the same mind. So going to page 220 and starting this this thing that I thought about for a long time. Let's see if we can get through it. Part 1, page 220, the opening of the eyes. There are three categories of people that all human beings should respect. They are the sovereign, the teacher, and the parent. There are three types of doctrines that are to be studied. They are Confucianism, Brahmanism, and Buddhism. Confucianism describes the three sovereigns, the 5 emperors, and the 3 kings, whom it calls the honorable ones of heaven. These men are depicted as the heads of the government officials and the bridges for the populace. In the age before the 3 sovereigns, people were no better than birds and beasts, in that they did not even know who their own fathers were. But from the time of the 5 emperors on, they came to know who their fathers and mothers were, treating them according to the dictates of filial piety. Thus, Chang Hua served his father with reverence, though the latter was stubborn and hard-headed. Also, the governor of Pa, after he became the emperor, continued to pay great respect to his father, the venerable Sari. The king, King Wu of the Chao dynasty made a wooden image of his father, the Earl of the West, and Ting Lan fashioned a statue of his mother. All of these men are models of filial piety. Okay, and we're only in the second paragraph, but let me put a little quick disclaimer in here before I continue. As he's talking, especially in this first part, he's going to be mentioning a bunch of dudes from India and then a bunch of dudes from China. And my pronunciation of the names of people from both of those countries is a little bit lacking. So I'm going to do my best to correctly pronounce all this. You guys should not utilize this recording as the only time you ever engage the opening of the eyes. I can't tell you how many times I've read this whole big damn go show. Okay, and it's never not meant more to me each time I've read it than it did the last time I had read it. So please don't you make that mistake. I have looked up every single one of these freaking names in the dictionary. So if you want to know the correct pronunciation, I don't know if I'm going to be able to have my memory recited it all verbatim today, but I'm going to do my best. If you want to know how really to say all these guys' names, look it up in the dictionary and find out who they are. That's how you find out all the stuff about Buddhism, is just by checking out every single note. After you do all of that background work, you begin to develop an actual understanding of who's who and whatever, even though you might be mispronouncing their names, okay? So again, at page 220, first column, at the very bottom, it says, the High Minister Pikan, seeing that the Yin dynasty was on the path to ruin, strongly recommended the ruler, though it cost him his head. Hong Yin, finding that his lord Duke Yi had been killed, cut open his own stomach and inserted the Duke's liver in it before he died. These men may serve as models of loyalty. So first we had models of filial piety, and now we got loyalty, okay? The first full paragraph, second column, page 220. Yin Xiao was the teacher of Emperor Yao. Wu Qian was the teacher of Emperor Shun. Tai Kung Wang was the teacher of King Wen. And Lao Tzu was the teacher of Confucius. These teachers, so now we've gone from filial piety, parents, to loyalty to the ruler, and now we're talking about sages. These teachers were known as the four sages. Even the honorable ones of heaven bow their heads to them in respect, and all people press their palms together in reverence. Sages such as these have left behind writings that run to over 3,000 volumes in such works as the records, the 5 canons, and the 3 histories. But all these writings in the end do not advance beyond the 3 mysteries. The first of the 3 mysteries is being. This is the principle taught by the Duke of Chao and others. The second mystery is non-being, which was expounded by Lao Tzu. The third is both being and non-being, which is the mystery set forward by Chuang Tzu. Mystery denotes darkness. Some say that if we ask what existed before our ancestors were born, we find that our life was born out of the primal force, while others declare that immanence and ignobility, joy and sorrow, right and wrong, gain and loss occur simply as part of the natural order. Now, we're at the top of page 221, but just in reading that first page, you can see that the Daishonin has himself studied in depth both all of these, Confucianism and Brahmanism and Buddhism. Okay, so he's going to lay all of these declaratives out based on the historical fact of him going and, again, studying everything in order to figure out why the country wasn't being protected as it should have been based on what he understood from the sutras. That's what started this whole thing when he entered the priesthood and he's 14 years old. Okay, continuing on page 221. These are theories that are cleverly argued, but that fail to take cognizance of either the past or the future. So even so, though some of this mind candy sounds cool, it's not really cutting the most important question that needs to be answered. These are theories that are cleverly argued, but that fail to take cognizance of either the past or the future. Mystery, as we have seen, means darkness or obscurity, and it is for this reason that it is called a mystery. It is a theory that deals with matters only in terms of the present. Speaking in terms of the present, the Confucians declare that one should abide by principles of benevolence and righteousness, and thereby ensure safety to oneself and peace and order to the state. If one departs from these principles, they say, then one's family will be doomed and one's house overthrown. But although the wise and worthies who preach this doctrine are acclaimed as sages, in their lack of knowledge about the past, they are like ordinary people, unable to see their own backs. And in their understanding about the future, they are like a blind man unable to see what lies before him. If, in terms of the present, one brings order to one's family, carries out the demands of filial piety, and faithfully practices the 5 constant virtues, then one's associates will respect one, and one's name will become known throughout the country. If there is a worthy ruler on the throne, he will invite such a person to become his minister or his teacher, or may even cede his position to him. Heaven, too, will come to protect and watch over such a person. Such were the so-called 5 elders who gathered about and assisted King Wu of the Zhou dynasty, or the 28 generals of Emperor Kuang Wu of the latter Han, who were likened to the 28 constellations of the sky. But since such persons knew nothing about the past or the future, they cannot assist their parent, their sovereign, or their teacher in making provisions for their future lives, and are therefore unable to repay the debt that they owe them. Such persons are not true worthies or sages. So he qualifies the Confucianisms, and then he says, but they're limited. Confucius declared that there were no worthies or sages in his country, but that in the land of the West there was one named Buddha who was a sage. This indicates that non-Buddhist texts should be regarded as a first step toward Buddhist doctrine. Confucius first taught propriety and music, so that when the Buddhist scriptures were brought to China, the concepts of the precepts, meditation, and wisdom could be more readily grasped. He taught the ideals of ruler and minister so that the distinction between superior and subordinate could be made clear. He taught the ideal of parenthood so that the importance of filial piety could be appreciated. And he explained the ideal of the teacher so that people might learn to follow. The great teacher Myolo says, the propagation of Buddhism truly depends on this. First, the teachings on propriety and music were set forth, and later the true way was introduced. Tentai states, in the Golden Light Sutra, it is recorded that all the good teachings that exist in the world derive from this sutra. To have a profound knowledge of this world is itself Buddhism. In Great Concentration and Insight, the Makashikan from Tentai, we read, I, the Buddha, have dispatched the 3 sages to educate the land of China. In the annotations on the Great Concentration and Insight, we read the practice of the Pure Law Sutra states that Bodhisattva Moonlight appeared in that land under the name Yin Hui. Bodhisattva Pure Bright appeared there as Confucius, and Bodhisattva Keshayapa appeared as Lao Tzu. Also, since the sutra is speaking from the point of view of India, it refers to China as that land. Secondly, we come to the non-Buddhist teachings of India. In Brahmanism, we find the 2 deities, Shiva, who has 3 eyes and 8 arms, and Vishnu. They are hailed as the loving father and compassionate mother of all living beings, and are so called the honorable ones of heaven and sovereigns. In addition, there are 3 men, Kapila, Uluka, and Rishabha. They are known as the 3 aesthetics. These aesthetics lived somewhere around 800 years before the time of the Buddha. The teachings expounded by the 3 aesthetics are known as the 4 Vedas and number 60,000. Later, in the time of the Buddha, there were 6 non-Buddhist teachers who studied and transmitted these non-Buddhist scriptures and acted as tutors to the kings of the 5 regions of India. Their teachings split into 95 or 96 different lines, forming school after school. The banners of their pride were raised higher than the heaven, where there is neither thought nor no thought. He's saying that as a point of reference of how high their banner of arrogance was. The banner of their pride was raised higher than the heaven where there is neither thought nor no thought. That's like the world of formlessness, I believe. And their dogmatic rigidity was harder than metal or stone. But in their skill and depth of understanding, they surpassed anything known in Confucianism. They were able to perceive 2, 3, or 7, even 7 existences, a period of 80,000 kalpas into the past, and they likewise knew what would happen 80,000 kalpas in the future. As the fundamental principle of their doctrine, some of these schools taught that causes produce effects. Others taught that causes do not produce effects, while still others taught that causes do and do not produce effects. Such were the fundamental principles of these non-Buddhist schools. The devout followers of the non-Buddhist teachings observed the 5 precepts and the 10 good precepts, practice the kind of meditation that is still accompanied by outflows, and ascending to the worlds of form and formlessness, believe they have attained nirvana when they reach the highest of the heavens, which is the world of formlessness. There's several different heavens in the world of formlessness. But although they make their way upward, bit by bit, like an inchworm, they fall back from heaven where there is neither thought nor no thought, the highest of all the heavens, and descend instead into the 3 evil paths. Not a single one succeeds in remaining on the level of the heavens, though they believe that once having attained that level, they will never descend from it. Each approves and practices the doctrines taught by his teacher and firmly abides by them. Therefore, if they didn't ever have the right teacher, then they don't ever have the right teaching. Thus, some of them bathe 3 times a day in the Ganges, even on cold winter days, while others pull out the hairs on their head, fling themselves against rocks, expose themselves to fire, burn their bodies, or go around stark naked. Again, there are those, these are again the people of India, the aesthetics of India. Again, there are those who believe that they can gain good fortune by sacrificing many horses, or who burn grasses and trees or make obeisance to every tree they encounter. They either just make obeisance by, they either sacrifice horses or burn grasses and trees, or they make obeisance to the trees themselves. Erroneous teachings such as these are too numerous to be counted. Their adherents pay as much respect and honor to the teachers who propound them as the heavenly deities pay to the Lord Chakra, or the court ministers pay to the ruler, to the ruler of the empire. But not a single person who adheres to these 95 types of higher or lower non-Buddhist teachings ever escapes from the cycle of birth and death. Ever escapes from the cycle of birth and death. Those who follow teachers of the better sort will, after 2 or 3 rebirths, fall into the evil paths, while those who follow evil teachers will fall into the evil paths in their very next rebirth. And yet, the main point of these non-Buddhist teachings constitutes an important means of entry into Buddhism. Some of them state 1,000 years from now the Buddha will appear in the world, while others state 100 years from now the Buddha will appear in the world. The Nirvana Sutra remarks, all of these non-Buddhist scriptures and writings in society are themselves Buddhist teachings, not non-Buddhist teachings. Okay, because Absolute Myo says everything is included in Myo, right? And in the Buddhist and in the Lotus Sutra, it is written, before the multitude that seem possessed of the 3 poisons or manifest the signs of distorted views. Pardon me. Before the multitude, they seem possessed of the 3 poisons or manifest the signs of distorted views. My disciples in this manner use expedient means to save living beings. I'm going to read that again. Bottom of page 222. And yet, last paragraph, and it's going to go over to page 223. And yet, the main point of these non-Buddhist teachings constitutes an important means of entry into Buddhism. Some of them state 1,000 years from now the Buddha will appear in the world, while others state 100 years from now the Buddha will appear in the world. Their Nirvana Sutra remarks, which is part of the perfect teaching. So he said, all of the non-Buddhist scriptures and writings in society are themselves Buddhist teachings, not non-Buddhist teachings. That's again going to the perspective of absolute Myo. And the Lotus Sutra, and in the Lotus Sutra, it is written, quote, before the multitude, they seem possessed of the three poisons or to manifest the signs of distorted views. My disciples in this way, in this manner, use expedient means to save living beings. So they're saying that these are actually expedient means to progress toward the truth. Thirdly, we come to Buddhism. One should know that the world-honored one of great enlightenment is a great teacher for all living beings, a great eye for them, a great bridge, a great helmsman, a great field of good fortune. The four sages and three ascetics of the Confucian and Brahmanical scriptures and teachings are referred to as sages, but in fact they are no more than ordinary people who have not yet been able to eradicate the three categories of illusion. Only their followers think of them that way. They are referred to as wise men, but in fact they are no more than infants who cannot understand the principles of cause and effect. With their teachings for a ship, could one ever cross a sea of the sufferings of birth and death? With their teachings as a bridge, could one ever escape from the maze of the six paths? But the Buddha, our great teacher, has advanced beyond even transmigration with change and advance, let alone transmigration with differences and limitations. So he's gone beyond the six realms and beyond even the realm of voice, hears, cause, awakened ones, and bodhisattvas. He's gone all the way to the state of Buddhahood. Okay, but the Buddha, our great teacher, is advanced beyond even transmigration with change and advance, six worlds, let alone transmigrations with differences and limitations, 7 through 9. He has wiped out even the very root of fundamental darkness, let alone the illusions of thought and desire that are as minor as branches and leaves. This Buddha, from the time of his enlightenment at the age of 30 until his passing at the age of 80, expounded his sacred teachings for a period of 50 years. Each word, each phrase he spoke is true. Not a sentence, not a verse is false. The words of the sages and worthies preserved in the scriptures and teachings of Confucianism and Brahmanism, as we have noted, are free of error, and the words match the spirit in which they were spoken. But how much more true is this in the case of the Buddha, who had spoken not a false word for countless kalpas? In comparison to the non-Buddhist scriptures and teachings, the doctrines that he expounded in a period of 50 or so years represent the great vehicle, the true words of the great man. Everything that he preached from the dawn of his enlightenment until the evening that he entered into nirvana is none other than the truth. However, when we examine the 80,000 teachings of Buddhism expounded during the period of 50 or so years and recorded in scriptures, we find that they fall into various categories such as Hinayana and Mahayana, provisional and true sutras, exoteric and esoteric teachings, detailed and rough discourses, true words and false words, correct and incorrect views. But among these, the Lotus Sutra alone represents the correct teaching of Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, the truthful words of the Buddhas of the three existences and the 10 directions. The world-honored one of great enlightenment designated a specific period of the preceding 40 years and more and defined the various sutras preached during that period, numerous as the sands of the Ganges, as the sutras in which he had not yet revealed the truth. He designated the Lotus Sutra preached during the 8 years as the sutra in which he now must reveal the truth. Thus, many treasures Buddha came forth from beneath the earth to testify that all that you have expounded in the Lotus Sutra is the truth. And the Buddhas, who are as numerous who are emanations of Shakyamuni, gathered together and extended their long tongues up to the Brahma heaven in testimony. These words are perfectly clear, perfectly understandable, brighter than the sun on a clear day or like the full moon at midnight. Look up to them and believe them. And when you turn away, cherish them in your heart. Continuing on page 224, first column. The Lotus Sutra contains two important teachings. The Dharani Analysis Treasury, Establishment of the Truth Precepts, Dharma Characteristics, and three treatises schools have never heard even so much as the name of these teachings. The Flower Garland and True Word schools, on the other hand, have surreptitiously stolen these doctrines and made them the heart of their own teachings. The doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life is found in only one place, hidden in the depths of the lifespan chapter of the essential teaching of the Lotus Sutra. Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu were aware of it, but did not bring it forth into light. Tentai Chiche alone embraced it and kept it ever in mind. The doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life begins with the concept of the mutual possession of the 10 worlds. But the Dharma characteristics and 3 treatises schools speak only of 8 worlds and know nothing of the entirety of the 10 worlds, much less of the concept of their mutual possession. The Dharma Analyst Treasury Establishment of Truth and Precept schools derive their teachings from the Agama Sutras. They are aware only of the 6 worlds and know nothing of the other 4 worlds. The 4 higher worlds that are only discussed in Mahayana Buddhism. They declare that in all the directions there is only one Buddha, and do not even preach that there is any other Buddha in any of the 10 directions. Of the principle that all sentient beings alike possess the Buddha nature, they of course say nothing at all. They refuse to acknowledge that even a single person possesses the Buddha nature. In spite of this, one will sometimes hear members of the precepts and establishment of the truth schools declaring that there are Buddhas in the 10 directions, or that all living beings possess the Buddha nature, something that's not actually in their doctrine or their teaching. This is because the teachers of these schools, who appeared after the passing away of the Buddha, had stolen these Mahayana doctrines and incorporated them into the teachings of their own schools, which are all Hinayana schools, everything you just mentioned up until now. Dharma characteristics and establishment, that's all Hinayana. To illustrate, in the period before the appearance of Buddhism, the proponents of the non-Buddhist teachings in India were not so bound up in their own views. But after the appearance of the Buddha, when they had listened to and observed the Buddhist teachings, they became aware of the shortcomings of their own doctrines. They then conceived the clever idea of appropriating Buddhist teachings and incorporating them into their own doctrines, and as a result, they fell into even deeper error than before. These are examples of the errors known as appropriating Buddhism or plagiarizing Buddhism, which has occurred in many occasions. I won't get into any specific examples, but people lifted stuff from stuff that they could see was correct and just stuck it into their own stuff in order to make it more valid. The same thing occurred in the case of the non-Buddhist scriptures in China. Before Buddhism was brought to China, Confucianism and Taoism were rather naive and childish affairs. But in the later Han, Buddhism was introduced to China and challenged the native doctrines of Confucianism and Taoism. In time, as Buddhism became more popular, there were certain Buddhist priests, because they had broken the precepts, that were forced to return to secular life, or who elected to join forces with the native creeds. Through such men, Buddhist doctrines were stolen and incorporated into the Confucian and Taoist teachings. In Volume 5 of Great Concentration and Insight, we read, "These days there are many devilish monks." Okay, in Volume 5 of the Makashikan, we read, this is Tentai, "These days there are many devilish monks who break the precepts and return to lay life. Fearing that they will be punished for their action, they then go over to the side of the Taoists. Hoping to gain fame and profit, they speak extravagantly on the merits of Lao Tzu and Chuang Tzu, usurping Buddhist concepts and reading them into their erroneous scriptures. They twist what is lofty and force it into a mean context. They destroy what is exalted and drag it down among the base, striving to put the two on an equal level." On Great Concentration and Insight, which would be on the Makashikan by Myolo, comments on this passage as follows: "Though they are monks, they destroy the teachings of Buddhism. Some break the precepts and return to lay life, as Wei Yun Sung did. Then, as laymen, they work to destroy the teachings of Buddhism. Men of this kind steal and usurp the correct teachings of Buddhism and use them to supplement and bolster the erroneous writings. The passage on twisting what is lofty means that adopting the outlook of Taoists, they tried to place Buddhism and Taoism on the same level to make equals of the correct and the erroneous, though reason tells us that this could never, ever be. Having once been followers of Buddhist teachings, they steal what is correct and use it to bolster what is incorrect. They twist the lofty 80,000 teachings of the 12 divisions of the Buddhist canon and force them into the mean context of Lao Tzu's 2 chapters and 5,000 words, using them to interpret the base and mistaken teachings of that text. This is what is meant by destroying what is exalted and dragging it down among the base. These comments should be carefully noted, for they explain the meaning of the foregoing description of events. So in other words, the Daishonin says, hey, I just said a lot of stuff here about Taoism and Confucianism and what was the first one? Whatever. Bottom line is that he's saying, don't forget, I just quoted Tiantai and Miolo. So understand, that's where I'm coming from when I've said what I just said. The same sort of thing happened within Buddhism itself. He goes, these comments should be carefully noted, for they explain the meaning of the foregoing description of events, where they stole all this stuff. Page 225, second column, last paragraph. The same sort of thing happened within Buddhism itself. Okay, these were non-Buddhist teachings that stole from Buddhism. Now he's talking about in Buddhism, it occurred in Buddhism itself. Buddhism was introduced to China during the Yunping era of CE 58 to 75 of the latter Han dynasty, and in time established its supremacy over Confucianism and Taoist teachings. But differences of opinion developed within Buddhism, resulting in the 3 schools of the South and the 7 schools of the North, which sprang up here and there like so many orchids or chrysanthemums. In time, in the time of the Qin and Sui dynasties, however, the great teacher Chi, which is Tiantai, defeated these various schools and returned Buddhism once more to its primary objective of saving all living beings. What Shakyamuni had said in the Lotus Sutra. Later, the teachings of the Dharma characteristics and true word schools were introduced from India. Later, the Dharma characteristics and the true word schools were introduced from India. And the flower garland school also made its appearance. Among these schools, the Dharma characteristics school set itself up as an arch opponent of the Tendai school because their teachings are as contradictory to each other as fire is to water. However, when the Tripitaka master Xuanzang and the great teacher Su En closely examined the words of Tiantai, they came to realize that the views of their own school were in error. Although they did not openly repudiate their own school, it appears that in their hearts they switched their allegiance to the Tiantai teachings. From the beginning of the flower garland and the true words, from the beginning, the flower garland and the true word schools were both provisional schools based upon provisional sutras. But the Tripitaka master Shanwu Wei and Qing Kan Chi, who introduced the esoteric true word teachings to China, usurped the Tiantai doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life and made it the core of the teachings of their school, adding the practice of mudras and mantras and convincing themselves that their teachings surpassed Tiantai. So they stole Lichen and Sanzen, incorporated, said it comes from, it's found also in the Mahavajrana Sutra, just lied their asses off because the translations from the Indian texts had not been made into Chinese. And so when they translated them into Chinese, this is when they inserted all this stuff. As a result, students of Buddhism, unaware of the real facts, because they had been incorporated at such an early time, came to believe that the doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life was to be found in the Mahavajrana Sutra that had been brought from India. Similarly, in the time, and again, brought from India, 3,000 realms, a single moment of life is Tiantai. It's from China. Similarly, in the time of the flower garland patriarch Cheng Huang, the Tiantai doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single mode of life was surreptitiously incorporated and used to interpret the passage in the Flower Garland Sutra that reads, "The mind is like a skilled painter. People were unaware that this was what had happened. So once again, then the Flower Garland school, not sutra, school, incorporated this concept of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life behind this single sentence of the mind is like a skilled painter. All right. But then talked about 3,000, each and sons that as though that mind of a skilled, so that says it all. And then they just embellish it based on Tentai's clarification, which is a ripoff. In the case of our own country of Japan, the Flower Garland and the other schools that comprise the 6 schools of Nara were introduced to Japan before the Tendai or Tendai and True Word schools. The Flower Garland, tree treatises, and Dharma characteristic schools argued and contended as inimical to one another as water and fire. In other words, they're nothing alike. But when the great teacher Dengyo appeared in Japan, he not only exposed the errors of the 6 schools, what had been conveyed from China to Japan, but also made it clear that the True Word school had stolen the principles of the Lotus Sutra as expounded by Tentai and made them the heart of the teachings of its own school. The great teacher Dengyo set aside the various tenets propounded by the leaders of the other schools and solely, in light of the sutras, attacked their views. As a result, he was able to defeat 8 eminent priests of the 6 schools, then 12 priests, then 14, then over 300, as well as the great teacher Kobo. Soon there was not a person in all Japan who did not acknowledge allegiance to the Tendai school, and the great temples of Nara, Toji, and the temples throughout all the provinces became subordinate to the head temple of the Tendai school at Mount Heiji. The great teacher Dengyo also made it clear that the founders of the various other schools in China, by acknowledging allegiance to the doctrines of Tentai, had escaped committing the errors of slandering the correct teachings of Buddhism. And we'll pause right there. This is the first column, page 226, at the very bottom of the page. Coming right back.